Welcome to Inside the She Cave, Trailblazers, Innovators, and Rulebreakers. I'm your host, Cindy Glanzrock. On today's episode, I am thrilled to welcome Janet Eilber. She's the artistic director of the Martha Graham Dance Company since 2005, which has been no easy feat. As a Graham fan, I have been following the dancers for decades, including one of my favorites, Lloyd Knight, who came to the company around the same time that Janet took over as artistic director. Martha Graham was a world-renowned American modern dance choreographer with an extremely expressive and athletic style of dancing, as I might say, a provocateur. She founded the company in 1926 and was the first to dance and perform at the White House, and the first dancer and choreographer to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom, among the first recipients of the United States National Medal of Arts. Graham danced and taught for over 70 years the Graham technique, which reshaped American dance. The company and school is based here in New York City, right across from the Whitney Museum of American Art, and the technique is taught worldwide. After some organizational issues and financial turmoil in 2000, the Martha Graham Company and the school was in jeopardy of ceasing operations. But Janet Eilber stepped in to turn things around back in 2005. While continuing Martha Graham's legacy and adding a modern yet intimate approach, while also a new way of expanding upon the Graham classics.
We began commissioning new choreography from today's top choreographers, making programs that placed the Graham classics beside entirely contemporary works. And it turns out there's a conversation to be had. Graham classics bring a historical context and this timelessness to the conversation.
Yes.
And the new works bring the contemporary conversation. They bring fresh eyes to the Graham classics, and there's a real resonance between the old and the new. And audiences have been really engaged.
So let's jump right in with Janet Eilber. I'm extremely excited today to be visited by Janet Eilber in the She Cave, the artistic director of Martha Graham. Martha Graham is the oldest dance company, but the freshest dance company, as far as I'm concerned, in the United States of America. It's been around since 1926 and, of course, founded by Martha Graham herself. What's so unique about the Martha Graham Dance Company, for me at least, is the modern and contemporary expression of dance. When I have gone to this dance company for over 30 or 40 years, going to see these dancers, their diversity, their versatile, their angelic athletes, Wall Street Journal quote, angelic athletes. We are here today with Janet, who's going to talk to us all about the dance company and as the creative and artistic director. She was a dancer and has recently been honored, I think it actually a very important honorary degree she received from the President of the United States as a 50-year legacy with the dance company as a dancer and now the artistic director. We want to welcome Janet, a beautiful woman, a innovator, trailblazer, and rulebreaker. Welcome, Janet Eilber.
Thank you, Cindy. It means so much to me to be part of this, your podcast, because I know you talk about innovation and breaking rules. And sometimes people think about Martha Graham as being very sort of old-fashioned and conservative, and it's quite the opposite. And I look forward to talking to you about it.
So what's going on with Graham these days? And give us a little history. I know there's a lot of changes that have occurred over the 50 years, especially since you've come on board 18 years ago in 2005 as the Grand Poobah. Things got shaken up a little bit.
Things got shaken up a little bit. Martha Graham herself was a revolutionary. She changed American dance. She discovered a new way of moving, a way that truly described who we were as a country and who we were as people. She created dance that revealed human emotion, and that was revolutionary throughout the 20th century. Towards the end of the 20th century, Martha passed away in 1991 at the age of 97. And her work sort of became frozen in time. When I came in as artistic director, people were really questioning the value of this kind of old American dance. So it really was my job to shake things up.
And from what I can see, since I went to Martha Graham when she was still living,
Yeah.
you have changed the course of, you've blazed new trails. So please share that with us.
It wasn't just for the Martha Graham Dance Company. We are the oldest company. So we kind of hit this barrier of being too old first for many of the other companies, for Paul Taylor and Merce Cunningham and many, Jose Limon, the legacy companies. And we realized the field of modern dance was always based on out with the old, in with the new. Each generation was supposed to throw out what came before and move into the future. So the field itself did not value its history. It didn't value old things. It valued her original contribution, but people thought the company was old and should just disappear into the past because the art form hadn't faced the fact that it had a history. You know, modern dance is only about 100 years old. It had never really accepted its history. It had always thrown it away. So we had to find a way, and we looked at other art forms like jazz and opera and, you know, the visual arts and said, well, how did these art forms make their history exciting and move into the future? So we began experimenting. You know, we do a spoken introduction in front of all of our performances, which when we first started doing it was like taboo. The critics, no, we don't want anyone to speak before we see dance. But the audiences were like, we love this.
Yeah,
we love context. It was like an audio tour in a museum. You know, you just get some context and it opens doors for you. Oh, and then Cindy, you know, we've done all sorts of things. We've done online video competitions. We've had unusual partnerships with everyone from the Metropolitan Museum to Google to the American Association of Psychiatrists, experimenting to find new points of access for new audiences.
And I remember I used to go in the 60s to a class. You had the classes, and now I know you have classes from, it says from 18 or 8 to 81 years old that you actually give classes. You can go in and take a Martha Graham class.
Absolutely. Our school is also almost 100 years old.
Congratulations.
And we have certificate programs. We have a wonderful teen program, you know, a big international program for students who come from all over the world. During COVID, we started Zooming Martha Graham classes. This is a huge part of how we reach audiences through students, through the next generation.
And I understand that a lot are previous legacy dancers that teach at the school. I believe, did you teach at the school too?
Oh, sure. You know, yes, our teachers, many of them are former company members. Many of them are still people who actually knew and worked with Martha Graham herself, like I did. So we still have a roster of Graham experts that are on our faculty, that do our outreach, that set the Graham ballets on other students and companies around the world, a network of artists that were, many of them trained by Martha herself.
I know that you are, obviously being a woman and a artistic director, I don't know what percentages of women as artistic directors in ballet companies that also work in the company. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's something you've studied, but is it unusual that you've stepped into this role? To me, it's innovative, of course, trailblazing, but tell us like where you came from and how you ended up here and what makes you trailblazing and innovative and different than the others.
In the dance world in general, there are fewer women artistic directors. Probably in the modern dance world, it's a little more prevalent. You know, we have been women-led since Martha Graham founded this company. Exactly. So that's quite an extraordinary record over 100 years. My background, Martha took me into the company at a very young age. I was still in college at Juilliard. This was 1972. I was trained in ballet and the Jose Limon technique and the Graham technique, and I danced with Martha for about a decade. Of course, becoming a devotee of the style of dancing that she created. It's so expressive. It's so athletic. It's just sexy and engrossing. Well, you can describe it maybe better than I can. Martha created new roles for me in ballets. She directed me in dances that she had created for herself. So I really had an in-depth study of Martha's legacy from the inside as a dancer.
Was she likable?
After I left.
Was she friendly and likable? I mean, if you have
she could be when she wanted to be.
Do you have a Martha Graham story when you were like traumatized and you had to figure out how to? Is that because
totally.
you couldn't do a movement in a specific dance, or your timing was off, or you just weren't listening and being able to follow through on what she was requiring of you, or what was it?
She was most upset with me very early on in my time with her in a rehearsal, where she literally told me I had to get my head on straight. Literally, physically, because I had a pose as a young dancer with my head tipped. I guess I thought it showed off my cheekbones or something, and it was sort of my automatic, this is how I stand on stage. And she was furious. She said, that is meaningless. It means 100% of nothing. And this was indicative of her desire that every move you made, every way that you held your body, that the angle of your head revealed who you were. So if you weren't thinking about it, if it was a default position, it was thoughtless.
Exactly.
She wanted me to get my head on my spine and connect it to what I wanted to say and understand my own power.
Wow.
In just a 5-minute fury from Martha Graham, teaching me that I had to mean what I said, physically embody my own power and what I wanted audiences to take away.
Well, interesting, because so many of the dances, our audience might not know, but are of Greek goddesses, the historical women in history. We're going in back to ancient history, or Native Americans, as we have a piece of artwork by a Native American behind me of these feathers that are painted of these beautiful birds. She seemed to really get behind women, and
well, of course, she was a woman, and she was creating roles for herself. At the very essence of who she was a performer. She was a creature of the theater. But she was attracted to these things that you're talking about. She was very inspired by many things. She was a voracious reader. But she did, as a young woman, observe the rituals of Native Americans in our Southwest. And she was so moved by what she called the necessity of the dance, of those rituals, because they were rituals about the climate, about the land, about crops. They weren't decoration. They weren't entertainment. They were sacred. And that moved her terrifically. And she took that into her dance. And similarly, the Greek tragedies that she borrowed for contemporary times, she borrowed women from Greek tragedy, and someone evil who's considered to be evil, like Medea.
Yes.
Martha Graham took and made a protagonist, made us understand why Medea was doing what she did. The record of the incredible roles Martha created of complex, ambitious, flawed, multifaceted, powerful women is extraordinary in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, really extraordinary. So she found material that was sort of the essence of being human, and she turned it into theater.
Exactly. And that's what's so interesting, because then you step in and you take something like the Immediate Tragedy. I guess that was originally done in 1937, and which was a dance described as a dance of determination and finally resilience. And she choreographed it, and then you reimagined it. And I love the costumes and the music and the lighting. And it's sort of 7 years after Lamentation, which was this great title for this ballet. And then this came along. So just a little bit about this one that you were reimagined.
Lamentation is sort of the shot heard around the world for modern dance. I have this book with me.
Oh, yeah, sure.
This has a photo of Martha in Lamentation on this. This is a new biography by Neil Baldwin called When Dance Became Modern. The Audible version is also available. If you'd prefer to listen to it, then read it.
So look forward to that.
You can see Martha Graham Martha is on the cover in a tube of fabric in a dance she called Lamentation. And you can imagine in 1930, when we'd just come out of the era of the flappers and the Charleston, and dancers were in feather boas and things, that a woman enshrouded in a tube of fabric that she manipulated to evoke the feeling of grief was shocking. And it really announced that modernism had arrived in dance. It wasn't called modern dance yet. Lamentation was the beginning, showing you so modern. Lamentation was such a modernist, almost like a modern sculpture come to life. That is when we began calling dance modern dance. Trying to evoke pure emotion in her dances, like grief in Lamentation, And by 7 years later, when she got to immediate tragedy, she was also evoking the world situation, because immediate tragedy was dedicated to the women in Spain who were suffering through the rise of fascism and the Spanish Civil War. It's a universal solo about, as you say, determination and resilience. It still speaks today to women who face challenges. That was the sort of the genius of Martha's works. They're so universal, and they travel through time. They're not, kind of locked in 1937 by any means. I think it's an interesting story. A young man came to us and he said, my father passed away recently, and I was going through his things and we found these rolls of film and Martha Graham is on them. Would you like them? And we said, of course we would like them. His father had been dating a dancer in Martha Graham's company in the 1930s, and they allowed him to sit in the front row of a performance with his camera and shoot the performance. So Immediate Tragedy was on that program.
Oh.
There was no other record of it. There was no film of it. There were a few studio photos of it. But suddenly we had these contact sheets with about 30 photos of Martha dancing this solo. Because we had contact sheets, we knew the order of the poses she was in so that we could figure out how she was moving one to the next. We knew what the costume looked like. Through the other archival research, we discovered the program notes and, who wrote the music and why she did it. But we really were able to bring it to life and bring it back to the stage because of that young man who brought us these canisters of film that had been in the closet for, 70 years.
Who back then, maybe would have shot something like that? I mean, Martha Graham liked to get the attention, if I understood her correctly. I mean, she liked to be recognized and noticed for her hard work. The fact that she did that is why you have probably a lot of materials to go back and reference for yourself as an artistic director.
As she became recognized as a genius, she was photographed by Imogen Cunningham, I think most notably by Barbara Morgan. Yes. Interestingly, two women in the 1930s and 40s who were breaking ground in their own art form. We feel very lucky before film kind of became more available in the 40s that we do have records of some of those early works through these photographs.
Curation and integration, you're pioneering, as part of pioneering the new audiences, the future Graham. I know we have Graham 100 that started this year, but just how have you been managing to attract people to want to watch something that was from the 1920s and, like you said, was kind of old and stodgy and dated? How have you given it a good kick in the
video competitions or spoken introductions or using media on stage, sort of on a roll with some of these contextual things for our programming. We began commissioning new choreography from today's top choreographers, making programs that placed the Graham classics beside entirely contemporary works. And it turns out there's a really a conversation to be had. Graham classics bring a historical context and this timelessness to the conversation. Yes. And the new works bring the contemporary conversation. They bring fresh eyes to the Graham classics. And there's a real resonance between the old and the new. And audiences have been really engaged and, kind of astonished by how well the Graham classics sit on a program with works that are extraordinarily different, new vocabulary. The audiences are also really amazed with how our dancers can go from dancing the Graham language, which is very recognizable and difficult and athletic, to dancing languages that our dancers are working with today, the more contemporary techniques and even ballet and flow, choreographers who are working with a very different physicality. And our dancers are so incredible. They can move from one to the next in a in a blink of an eye.
Are you choosing the new choreographers? And can you mention a few of them that you brought on board? Because I know I've gone to some of these wonderful new shows, and I didn't know if that was your choice or other people's choice or the board's choice or who else is involved in the decision making?
No, I bring a presentation to our board. We're, of course, always listening to presenters, the people who run the theaters that we travel to, because over 95% of our performing is on the road. So we're constantly thinking about audiences, what will be of most interest in other areas of the country and in the world. We travel Europe, we've just gotten back from China. All of that goes into my research about which choreographers might be right for our company. We've worked with everyone from Sidi Larbi Sherkawi, who's gotten a Tony nomination for Jagged Little Pill on Broadway and done some other amazing things. We've worked with Sonia Taya, who's gotten a Tony Award for Moulin Rouge. Nacho Duato and Mats Ek, these are enormously respected choreographers in Europe. Kyle Abraham, Azure Barton, Michelle Dorrance, the tap dancer, Annie B. Parson, Pamela Tanowitz. People who know the dance world know that these are the, shall we say, the hottest names in dance right now. And our most recent one is by
the movers and the shakers.
The literal movers and shakers. Hofesh Schechter is our most recent guy. He's based in the UK, and he's a fabulous choreographer. You know, their interest in the Graham legacy. I should add that people say, well, how do you choose them? Mm-hmm. And it's not just because I think they're great. I specifically look for people who are very different from Martha Graham. I don't want a work that's Graham-esque. Mm-hmm. I think a Graham-esque work will suffer if it's put beside a Graham work. So I look for people who are really forging their own area in dance. Mm-hmm. And we also do thematic seasons. For example, we did one called Myth and Transformation, where we focused on Martha Graham's Greek works, but we also brought in Andanos Phoniadakis, a Greek choreographer who made a new ballet based on a great Greek myth. Sidi Larbi Sherkawi joined us during our theme of the sacred and the profane, because he often does very ritualistic works based on sacred ritual. And so the works were tied together to Martha's works through an idea, through a thematic idea. And that connected them, even though the technique and the style was different in a very exciting, sort of astonishing way.
So there's great finesse to taking from the old and bringing the new. It's almost putting modern contemporary artwork with your antique furniture.
or it's like putting together an exhibit like Picasso and all the American artists that he's inspired. You know, exactly. I mean, you can, we're really curating one of the greatest legacies of the 20th century, some of the greatest iconic artworks of the 20th century created by Martha Graham. And we're trying to curate them in ways that, you know, the finest museums curate things by commissioning new works, by doing contextual programming, auxiliary programming, and finding many different ways for audiences to connect with our legacy.
It's interesting to me that Martha knew so many famous people. I mean, the list is long. I'm sure the book is filled with that. I mean, speaking of Picasso,
yes.
I'm sure, you know, she spent time, of course, with all these great artists. And I know she had a mentor, if I recall. And we speak of him as a composer, as a music composer, because music was so important, I guess, to her.
Louis Horst was Martha Graham's musical director.
Yes.
Well, they met, actually, when she was a student in the Denishon company. Right. The Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn were early American dancers who had their own company that toured the States. Louis Horst was their musical director, and Martha Graham came to them as a student and became a star in their style of dancing, which was American dance at that time. It was very escapist. It was very decorative, theatrical, magic, smoke, great costumes, ornate, you know, borrowing imaginary gods and goddesses, and very much, you know, fantasy dancing, escapist stuff. And Martha and Louis, when she left, he was hugely influential, introducing her to Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, and to the their ideas about dance as it resonated with psychology and psychiatry and the human condition, basically. Really the underpinnings of her breaking away from the decorative, stripping away the decorative, and getting down to the essences of being a human being.
Are all your dancers, such as yourself and the ones that are behind you, that some are retired? I know Lloyd Knight, to your left, is still there after 18 years, but are they all asked to understand the philosophy, whether it's Nietzsche or other philosophers, and they're asked to read about it and
Yes.
study it.
So much homework to be done. I mean, and this is Blakely White McGuire, who's
Yes.
was a star of the company when I was first artistic director, as was Miki Orihara. These are all great Graham artists. And the way they became Graham artists and the expectations of Martha, and that continues today, is that they study the ideas behind any dance.
Mm-hmm.
They are expected to create their own interpretation of these classic roles. So they're not just coming in and dancing a dance created in 1940 and doing exactly what the dancers did back then. For one thing, they're much more athletic. You know, the athleticism and power of dancers has changed over the years. But for another thing, Martha expected a dancer to bring themselves and their own personal vulnerability, their own personal powers, their powers of interpretation to any of these roles. It's almost like an actor taking on a great Shakespearean role. You know, you don't try to do it like the people in 1920 did it. You bring your own thing to it.
Unless
so this
you're dancing
requires a lot of
unless you're doing
yes,
Swan Lake.
although those dancers, you know, the reason you go to see the stars in those ballets is because they bring a unique interpretation to old roles. And that's the expectation here. I mean, if you're going to dance Medea, you've got to read the play. You've got the plays. You've got to do that kind of homework.
Yes.
You've got to understand where Martha was coming from when she created the dance, why she starts that dance in the middle of the story.
Exactly.
You know, there's all sorts of stuff that they have to dive into.
And the legacy of Martha, which is being carried forward right now, you have to have big shoulders to carry this legacy. And of course, you have, big, strong shoulders, so you can handle that. But when you were a little girl, did you ever imagine that you would be running Martha Graham Dance Company?
All I could imagine, is I wanted a tutu and ballet slippers when I was a little girl. You never think ahead. Even when I was a member of the Martha Graham Dance Company, I never imagined leading it someday. I left Martha to do some work on Broadway.
Right.
And television. I studied acting, and with each new challenge in my career, I discovered Martha had really prepared me for all of that. She had prepared me to be an actress for just what we're talking about, how I had to create interpretations and understand character. She really had prepared me to be an artist in different realms. She had prepared me to understand audiences, although she would tell you that it was all about her art and the individual things she was trying to create. She was incredibly intuitive about audiences and how they kept catching up with her. She would break through something, and then a couple of years later, she would have to find something there were new frontiers because the audience was catching up with her.
So even
I
with
learned
her,
those sorts of life lessons from Martha.
Even with Martha, whether it was the stage set, Isamu Noguchi sets that she used and that you still use today, and the costumes that she created and the music. How are you blazing that trail and continuing to? Who's the costume designers and who are the lighting designers?
Well, it's, with each choreographer, we commission for a new work. It's sort of a new creative team. We do have a wonderful lighting designer that we often work with, a wonderful woman lighting designer, Yi Chung, who's created lighting designs for many of our new productions. Our costumes, right now, we're working with Oana Barit, who's also overdoing Don Q in another place, and Karen Young, who is a costume designer that understands the Graham legacy. She's worked on our classic costumes as well as created new ones for us. But, in the past, you may also be thinking of the fact that Halston made costumes when Martha Graham was alive.
Halston.
Donna Karan. Calvin Klein did costumes that we'll be dancing in this fall when we bring the Maple Leaf Rag back to the stage.
Great. Maple Leaf Rag is coming back.
Martha Graham was a great collaborator. People think of her as very sort of stern and dictatorial, but with many incredible, the musicians, Aaron Copland and Samuel Barber and Menotti, and, she was inspired, as were they, by their partnerships in the 20th century. And we try to bring that same kind of collaborative spirit into our studio.
It's so interesting. I was reading about 1991 autobiography, Blood Memory, which I'm sure
Mhm.
Graham, where she lists her final performance as in her 1970 appearance in Cortege
Yes.
of Eagles, where she was, I guess, 76 years old. It's amazing to think that she choreographed, as it was 181 different, what does he call it, compositions or
Yes.
dances. She just seems like a plethora of creativity, and yet she wanted to dance and dance till
Yes.
till they literally pulled her off the
Yeah.
stage.
The breadth and depth of her contribution and her influence allowed her to stay on stage. And she choreographed works that were more and more acting roles and less physical for herself.
I see.
And the audiences came to see. Without that genius, our dancers can't stay on stage until they're 76. I mean, that's just a
Yeah.
different. But dancers do stay. I mean, Mickey stayed with us. Probably into her fifth decade,
Oh, wow.
into her 50s.
Mickey
Lloyd has been with us
Lloyd.
18 years, and he came to us after he graduated for college. So you can imagine that he's,
Yeah.
a very young 41-year-old.
Yes.
That dancers, the average age of retirement for dancers in the United States is 31.
Is it
And
that
in the
young?
Graham Company, because there's this combination of acting and dancing, they become so expressive that they can be smarter about their physicality over the
Mhm.
years and learn how to phrase things that are still incredibly impressive, but not as taxing as what they would do at 20, for example.
I know that Martha received, several awards. I'm sure you have too. You just earned a 50th anniversary, I think, last year in 2022. I know Martha Graham received from two presidents national awards
Right.
and presidential awards,
Mhm.
and being honored as not just legacy, but just as an incredible representative of dance for the United States of America, and just such a strong,
Right.
forceful woman. And
It's an
yourself,
American treasure, I think. I was lucky enough to dance at the White House when Martha Graham received the Medal of Freedom. I
wonderful.
danced two solos, Lamentation and Frontier. This was 1976. Gerald Ford was president. Betty Ford, the first lady, had been a member of Martha Graham's company when she was
That's
Betty
right.
Bloomer before she was married.
How interesting.
That was an extraordinary experience. And so to receive a letter from the Bidens, Joe and Jill sent me a letter on the anniversary of my first performance with the company, which was in 1972. So it was the 50th anniversary of my first performance.
Bravo. Standing ovation. Standing O. Standing O.
It was pretty stunning. I was so surprised. So
And I think Ronald
I'm
Reagan
still,
also gave Martha Graham an award, wasn't there?
yes,
During
I think so too. I'm not remembering the name
national
of it at the
medals
moment,
that
but I mean,
she wasn't a
she
political
was
dancer.
not political.
No.
No, her art is really universal, really speaks to all people.
Yes.
It's about the human experience.
What's next? Graham 100. We have 3 years to look forward to Graham. Tell us just in brief what's going on,
Yes,
and also where are you heading? I know
yes,
you're in Vail in a couple on July
yes.
29th.
We realized our 100th anniversary, we're the oldest company in the States, is in 2026. And, 4 or 5 years ago, I started thinking, how are we going to celebrate this? What are we going to put together? And I finally realized we cannot do it all in 1 year.
No
We
way.
just cannot describe the breadth of this contribution and what the company has done in its 100 years. So we decided to celebrate for 3 seasons. Of course, the company will be performing classic works. Each season will have a commission. We also have all these auxiliary events happening. PBS is supporting a documentary that's being made about the company. The NYC Dance Project is photographing the company and making a coffee table book that will have archival photos as well as current photos in it. We're partnering with the Met Museum. We're going to do pop-up solos in many of the courtyards at the Met this fall. The New York Public Library of Performing Arts at Lincoln Center is creating an exhibit, really comprehensive exhibit that will be in 2026. And we have many partners around the world. We're inviting other dance companies and universities to license the work that Martha created and perform it. We're inviting them to do a creative project based on Lamentation, where they create new choreography inspired by Martha Graham's Lamentation. And we're touring the world, starting, as you said, at the Vail Festival. on July 28th and 29th this year. Then we're going to Jacob's Pillow from the 16th through the 20th of August.
I'm going to try to get there.
And
to Jacob's Pillow.
Great. We're doing our Medea ballet. We've been talking about Medea.
Yes.
We're doing another Greek-themed work, Errand into the Maze, and our brand new work by Hofesh Schechter titled Cave. It's a really dynamic program. We hit the road in September in the States, in Pennsylvania, in California, and Colorado, and then we're going to Europe for 3 weeks, Spain, Italy, Germany.
Tell us about those two places you danced in Egypt and Athens. I think, was that the pyramids in Egypt?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Well, we danced actually in the theater in Egypt. In Athens, we danced at the ancient amphitheater that is below the Acropolis, the Herod Atticus.
Wow.
Extraordinary, thousands of years old. And to have the Graham works, which seemed so new compared to that stage and that setting, but they had the relationship of, again, the essence of being human, that has traveled through time. That's what Martha Graham captured. And what we continue to try to represent. Dance connects body to body. It kind of bypasses the brain. It's just a kinesthetic conversation and relationship. And it means anyone, anywhere in the world can connect to what we're trying to offer on stage and through the work of Martha Graham and these new choreographers.
I'm a big proponent of when people say, I don't watch dance, I don't go to dance, I don't love dance. I'm like, well, do you meditate? Because it's so meditative. It's so, I think it just brings down, all the stress that you have going on in our world. And you go to a dance performance and it just seems like they're doing all the work and we're just watching. And we're so lucky to see these.
Yeah.
And they're so athletic and their expressions and their beautiful bodies and their muscles and they're just such, heavenly creatures that come down to serve us.
Yeah.
So
yeah, our dancers are world class. They really are jaw-droppingly beautiful. They really are.
Yeah.
And, people connect to our work, as you say, do you meditate? Do you breathe?
Exactly.
Dancing is based on the breath,
exactly.
The activity of the breath. And, even the babies you see on Instagram dancing to the beat. Everyone's a dancer. Everyone is a dancer. As I say, there's this kinesthetic kinship, body to body, when you come and see our dancers dance.
I love when you come up stage. You have some wonderful benefits. You have the benefit every year, which is at the City Center still. Oh no, I'm sorry, down to the Joyce Theater. Excuse me.
Every other year. One year we're at the Joyce, the next year at City Center.
Right.
We trade back and forth.
So what's
our
next?
Gala?
When is that gala?
Our next gala is in April at City Center. We have a world premiere by Jamar Roberts, fabulous choreographer, and the score is by Rhiannon Giddens. Rhiannon is a remarkable singer. She just won the Pulitzer Prize for an opera she created titled Omar. She's the artistic director of the Silk Road Project, which was created by Yo-Yo Ma. And she's an incredible folk singer. And so they're working together to create a companion work, something that we're producing a new production of Agnes DeMille's Rodeo with its famous Copland score reorchestrated for bluegrass. So people will come to see us at City Center and hear this new bluegrass arrangement of Aaron Copland, see the Agnes DeMille choreography for Rodeo, combined with this world premiere by Jamar Roberts and Rhiannon Giddens. And we're really excited about it.
So when was the original Rodeo, and was that someone that Martha asked to choreograph on her behalf, Agnes DeMille?
No, Agnes DeMille was a disciple of Martha's, but a great choreographer in her own right. Mm-hmm. She went on to choreograph on Broadway. She did Carousel and Brigadoon and Oklahoma. That's all Agnes DeMille's legacy. Yes. But Rodeo is one of her most famous works for the stage. Speaking of new audiences and ways to reframe the classics, we're having the score reorchestrated for bluegrass in order to open the conversation about a more inclusive history of the 20th century, that bluegrass is really an art form that grew out of the Black community. It was started by Black artists as kind of a neglected area of American history, and we want to have that conversation. Rodeo is also about gender. It seems to tell the story about a tomboy, a cowgirl who wanted to be one of the guys, but finally puts on a dress so that one of them will notice her, bringing that a new twist too, so that today's conversations about gender and being allowed to be who you are. We're not going to have these conversations from the stage. We're just going to show these joyful, joyous ballets. It sort of will resonate with these ideas that are so much a part of culture today.
I was impressed at Lincoln Center. They probably got the idea from you, Janet, that Misty Copeland got up before the dance and spoke about the dance and interviewed one of the dancers that was going to be in the performance. And out here at Guildhall in East Hampton, they did that also with the ballet company, where they had this conversation about the dancers with the choreographer. So it seems like you all they're learning from you all, and they're being more open to the conversation that happens before the dance or after the dance.
We feel like we kind of started it, but I think people have just discovered audiences want context.
Yes.
They want to know these details. I mean, it's the information age. They want to be able to Google on their phone and say, what's this all about? So if you welcome them in by just giving them some information, a little bit of context, then the artwork speaks to them so much more deeply, I think. And this has been discovered. It's no longer sort of the groundbreaking thing that when we did it and critics said, oh, don't speak from the stage. What are you doing?
Right.
It's really changed.
We're here for just to see the dancers dance. What do you want? This is not a speaking engagement. But I love that the legacy continues, and you're carrying the baton and so many other things. I love that you have an interesting board, primarily women. Only about, I think I counted, there was about 60-70% women on your board, which is also interesting that there's this consistency about women carrying on the legacy of Martha Graham.
I don't know if it's on purpose. We do try to keep a very diverse board, not only culturally, but in terms of the skills that bring, whether they're a lawyer or someone with an expert in marketing or banking or broadcasting. We do love to have a board that bring their skills and help us, which is, of course, always needed.
Well, I've had so many Graham crushes, if there's such a thing. So over the years, several have retired. We discussed them earlier. I see Lloyd to your, to your left back there. What is he dancing in there? Because I'm doing a shout out to Lloyd Knight, since he's such
shout out to Lloyd Knight. Yeah, he's in our Medea ballet at the Pillow. He's dancing Jason. He's
wonderful
Medea's partner.
Yes,
and that he's also in the Hofesh Schechter work. He's also one of the leads in Rodeo. So when you come to see Rodeo, he's playing the head wrangler, and he's very funny. That dance is really a wonderful comedy. So, he's really busy this season.
Okay, that's terrific. Well, you have quite a bit to look forward to in 2023 and 4 and 5.
The Martha Graham Dance Company, the first and the future. The first because we broke so much ground.
Yeah.
We were the first in so many ways, but we use that history to launch us into the future, commissioning new work.
I love that.
Experimenting with how we reach audiences. And speaking of reaching audiences, another tool that's been very important to us is social media.
Of course.
We have 250,000 followers on Instagram, Zoom. We stream open rehearsals from our studios. So we hope people will find us on Instagram and Patreon, become a digital subscriber, come take a class at our school.
I'm going to do so. Are you down at 55 Bethune still, down in Meatpacking?
We are.
Okay.
We're down in the very cool neighborhood.
That building's filled with artists. It was, and I think it was it originally one of the other modern dance companies? Was it? Merce Cunningham was there, and it's that wonderful.
Yeah, so we're in a cool neighborhood. We love having guests. We do a studio series. You can find out about it on our website. We do open rehearsals.
We can come watch rehearsals at the studio.
Come watch rehearsal, and the restaurants in this neighborhood are fabulous. We're a few blocks from the new Whitney and from the High Line, and we love having people come to our intimate setting and getting to know us. Our website is marthagraham.org, or our schools is marthagraham.edu. On Instagram, we are Martha Graham Dance.
Okay.
And I think also on Facebook. Calendar events are on there so that you can see what cities we're going to be. If you're going to be in Denver, if you're going to be in Los Angeles, if you're going to be in Bologna, Italy, or Seville, we're going to be in all those places in the next few months.
Well, thank you for taking the time to meet the audience live and personal inside the She Cave. Please subscribe to Inside the She Cave, Trailblazers, Innovators, Rulebreakers, wherever you listen to podcasts, including but not limited to Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Podcasts. If you prefer to watch, you can visit us on YouTube.